tape storage to be easier to access, and every organization is going to have different reasons they want to. Some are looking at building private clouds off of it. Some are looking at, like Kevin's talking about, replacing maybe having to do backup because they have a second or third or fourth or 20th copy of their data in a much more restful, easy to access for a web services environment kind of place. We also have a lot of partners who are looking at, we do a lot of intelligence around the asset management in the video industry, for example, knowing facial recognition of the videos or all the information NASCAR has about which driver was driving at which race and who is he racing against. All that intelligence is done in software, in which in a lot of cases those partner applications who have that intelligence are looking at being able to use a deep storage tier as well. So the next presentation that Dave and I are going to go through is talking about the DS3 client development community and talking about where are the different ways we see folks wanting to tie to DS3 and leverage Black Pearl. And you know, if you look at I don't know how many clients are out there for S3 right now, but there's a myriad of uses from consumer to business to personal to all these different things that we probably don't know at this point, all the different kinds of clients. In fact, I know we don't know at this point the different kinds of clients that are going to be created. What we have is a good program on enabling those clients to be developed. We certainly know the first ones that we're launching and supporting. We have some partners here who have done some development. And we know, we've probably talked to, I'm looking at Matt Starr back there as well. We've probably talked to, what, 30 or 40 customers about this at this point under NDA. We've been trying to keep this under wraps because this is going to shake up the industry. This is net new, innovative technology enabling, one, tape to tie to the entire web infrastructure community where it really can't tie today. And it's a really big shift in how storage can be used in traditional infrastructures as well. So Spectra we certainly talked to enough customers to validate our direction, and probably everyone we talked to had a slightly different usage, is my point. Of those 30 to 40, they all have different thoughts of the value it adds into their infrastructure. So our client development community, I'm going to talk a little bit about what tools we have available. Dave's going to talk in more detail about the different kinds of clients that are out there, and then we'll tie up with some of the clients that are written or in process today. So if you go to Amazon Web Services website, you're accustomed to seeing a lot of details about how to write to S3. There's APIs and all these different things. Effectively, Spectra has generated the same kind of tools and resources for DS3 with a couple of additions as well. So we have the basics that you would expect. We have an API. We have introduced a simulator, and this is one of those things that we think is really helpful, that most companies don't necessarily have a tape library or a Black Pearl appliance sitting in their developers' offices to develop to. That's one of the big differences about kind of the adoption versus a guy can sit in the corner and write code to move data to S3. He doesn't need quite as much hardware as you need for a deep storage infrastructure. So what we introduced was a simulator so that any of you who were part of our development community could download the simulator, write your client code, and test it against the simulator versus having to have any of the hardware in your environments, making it easier to adopt and write the clients. We have a full software developers kit and all the associated documentation you would need to reference how do you write a client, what are the APIs, what are the tools available. We have client code examples that as we start to look at introducing more and more DS3 clients, our hope is that both between some folks Dave has hired and brought into the company as well as other members of the developers community that folks can download sample code and just tweak it. Another really interesting thing, and I may be saying something Dave's going to say and he hates when I do that, but the S3 clients that are out there, those hundreds of thousands of S3 clients can easily be modified to the DS3 interface as well. The development community includes a developers forum. We very much intend to make this a social development forum where developers can talk amongst themselves without Spectra needing to be involved. And really the goal of this, while we initially are keeping everything in our development community under lock and key, that we will over time be talking about what our open source strategy is on pieces of this, and I'm going to wait and see what Dave says about that before I talk more about it. But the goal initially is we're not putting all these tools up on our website for anyone to just go download today. We want to make sure we understand how folks are going to use it. We want to be able to have a good interaction with the first several that are starting to build the clients to make sure we provide everything we need to. So it's going to be a crawl, walk, run introduction of what we keep for DS3 within kind of the Spectra walls, and as we slowly start to introduce pieces. But with that, I want to hand it over to Dave to talk about the different client options.
Okay. We're going to talk about client development, and so what is our goal for client development? Well, it's very simple. Get as many clients writing to DS3 as fast as possible. No very clear goal, because that will maximize our sales. Obviously, we're the only one with a DS3 appliance today. That probably will not be the case forever. So we want to maximize those clients. So we want to make it as simple as possible for people to develop client code. So Matt and Molly have gone out to a lot of customers. Very easy opening question for a customer. Do you know what S3 is? And if they do, it's going to be an easier conversation than when they say they don't. So we have to provide the capability for both people who know S3 and don't know S3 and make it as simple as possible for them to develop clients. Funny enough, through some of our conversations with customers, many more know about S3 than we thought. And people are using S3 in very creative ways, and I'll give you a couple examples. One company is using it for distribution. I have code that I need to distribute to 10 sites. From my home site, I put it up on S3, and then the other 10 sites can pull it. We've also seen customers say, I need to move data to a post house. I'll write it to S3, and then the post house picks it up overnight. So people are coming up with very creative ways. So we saw more interest in S3 than we thought, but however, there are still a lot of people out there don't know what it is, need to explain it, and we need to provide tools for it. So we classify our clients into 3 categories. There's the clients we're going to produce. So Spectra has got developers generating clients. These are going to be the most popular environments, the ones that we think we can maximize sales in, and our intention will be that this will become part of those packages. And I'll talk about the first one that we're going to release with the product. It's a Hadoop client, and I'll tell you how it works. The second is partners. So these are, you can think of these as middleware software players. So these are people that might be writing to disk today, and I'll take an example. I'm a surveillance application, and I write to disk. I'm all of a sudden getting long-term retention requirements to bid on this contract for a government agency. I could write a client that would move my surveillance data over to DS3 or over to Black Pearl fairly quickly and fairly easy using these tools. Much easier than ever it has been to write to a tape system before. And then we have some big customers. So we have some customers, and I'll give an example. We have a media entertainment customer. It's in the sports industry, and it's currently using HSM technology, and it says, I can't maintain and do the things I need to do with that technology. And one of the things that's happening in that particular site is I want to be able to prefetch data the day before because I know we're going to do it's Mickey Mantle's 60th birthday or something, and I want to bring back Mickey Mantle highlights and have them edited. So the day before, I want to be able to instruct the system to bring back exact content. So they have an interest in this type of technology because they can directly pull the objects that they want to pull out. So for most end user customers, though, we won't be writing a client for them. If they're a small customer, it'd be cost prohibitive to do that. As Molly said, there's really 2 parts to the development toolkit. There is the software development kit. I'm going to show an example of that, and the simulator. So the client that we're going to provide out of the chute is Hadoop, and we're working in conjunction with Yahoo on this client. So for those who don't know too much about Hadoop, Hadoop is a very scalable system. Could be thousands of nodes on this side. The typical infrastructure for Hadoop is 1 gigabit Ethernet because most of this stuff has been deployed before the advent of 10 gigabit became cheap. So you have thousands of 1 gigabit Ethernet connected servers. Hadoop makes 3 copies of all data that goes onto it. It puts it on 3 nodes. So one of the newer releases of Hadoop, one of the things they added was something called DiskCP. And what it did is it allowed you to do a copy from Hadoop to S3. to S3 directly. And why it's called distcp instead of cp, like a Linux cp command, is because it distributes that copy across all the nodes. So instead of writing to S3 from one node, it might take 100 nodes and write that data S3. What we did at Spectra is we essentially modified distcp for Black Pearl. So this is an example of taking an S3 client, modifying it, and now it writes to Black Pearl. It does that by moving the data over, just like the previous example, moves over Black Pearl, and then Black Pearl moves it over to the tape library system and puts it on tape. So this client will be available at GA, and our intention is this will become part of the Hadoop distribution at some point. And what that means was once it comes to part of the Hadoop distribution is anybody who downloads the newest version of Hadoop all of a sudden has access to connect a Black Pearl into their environment and move data to it. So, okay, the other thing I'd like to talk about, one of the other things, is the development toolkit. So the interface is very simple. DS3 is pretty simple, but there are some underlying requirements of the interface that can be pretty complicated. And let me give you a couple examples. When you say, I want to write a 1 terabyte object over the DS3 interface, you don't send 1 terabyte at a time. The chances of some data corruption occurring in a 1 terabyte stream is very, very high. So what the interface does is it breaks it down, and it's called multi-part upload. So it creates like 100 megabyte hunks and sends it across in 100 megabyte hunks, data validating everyone. So if there's a data integrity problem, you only have to send another 100 megabytes. The API and the toolkit hides that all from you. You as a client developer actually talk to our APIs, and that multi-part upload is completely hidden from you and transparent to you, so you don't have to worry about, oh, multi-part upload. In fact, the bulk commands are hidden from you. You basically say, I want to write 1,000 files to the API, and the toolkit is the one that will actually generate the bulk put command, prime the system, and send the data. So the toolkit will be available in 4 different languages. It'll be available in C, Python, Java, and Ruby. So if you're a Ruby developer and you want to talk to DS3, you would download the Ruby gems, install them with your Ruby code, your Ruby client, and basically you have now the ability to talk to a Black Pearl. We actually provide a file mover. This is one of the example clients we provide. What this does is you can take a directory, say, I want to move this directory to Black Pearl, and it will just go do it for you. So there's your client that you're developing in whatever language you'd like to develop, and then we'll provide you the file mover so you can test to make sure you got things set up. And as Molly mentioned, we also provide a simulator because we're not going to send Black Pearls to every client developer in the world. And the simulator imitates a Black Pearl. It responds to the DS3 requests. And one of the really nice things about the simulator is you can change the clock rate. So tape cartridges take 45 seconds to load. A tape cartridge takes 30 seconds to stream to first byte of data. With the simulator, you can run it at 1,000 times that speed. So if I'm developing my client, I can turn fixes and improvements around very, very quickly. I can basically do a fix, say I'm running it at 1,000 times the speed. Did that work? Okay, it didn't work. Now what the simulator won't do, back to Ray's point, is it won't do performance. And you can't put a petabyte of data into the simulator. It's for really getting your functional client working. The next step would be then buying a Black Pearl system and connecting it, or working with us and we'll send you a Black Pearl system to connect it. Yes, John?
You said you could do this over distance. Is it possible to, at some point for Spectra, to set up the test environment and then let you connect to it remotely?
Yes, I think we haven't, it's funny you mentioned that because we haven't really talked about that, but that's a very good idea that somebody would develop their client with a simulator, and that as a final checkout, they could connect into our environment and essentially do final verification. So I will take that under advisement because it's part of the puzzle we haven't really talked about, which is...
I mean, you've not yet looked at sharing, that you're selling access to these things shared online?
Right. We don't intend to be a service provider ourselves. So we may sell this product to service providers, but Spectra currently does not have any intention of getting into the service provider business. So I want to give an example of how easy it would be through these 4 calls. So I want to send some data to Black Pearl. I want to create a client. The first command I could call would be create bucket. I give it a name. Call it Joe. And then the next thing I could say is bulk put Joe these 100 files, and they would happen. And then I could export that bucket, which would eject the tapes. So this API, these are example calls of our API that we're providing to client developers. It's this simple. It's by far the simplest mechanism I've ever seen in my years in the business to write to tape storage. You can create clients very quickly. And if you're interested in this part of it, I would highly recommend you come to Tech Day tomorrow, which is, we're going to be doing presentations at 10, 11, 12, and show a Black Pearl in action, show how these commands work, and how you can move data to a Black Pearl system. So with that, I think that's it. So, got some questions. I'll start with Ray, actually, in the back.
So is a bucket, can a bucket span tape cartridge?
Yes. So what can't happen is a tape cartridge can't span buckets. So when a tape is allocated...
Repeat that again, Dave. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Repeat that question.
Okay, so his question was, can there be, I'll put it a different way. Can there be multiple tapes in a bucket? And almost always there will be, because buckets are big things with many, many objects in them. Can a tape be in multiple buckets? No. So once a tape is allocated to a bucket, it's part of that bucket. And the reason, Ray, is because you can export a bucket. And when you export, you don't want to export data that you didn't want exported. Yes.
Can one object be a member of multiple buckets without replicating the object?
No. In fact, the S3 specification doesn't offer that. In S3, in true Amazon S3, if you want to replicate an object, you actually have to read it out of the bucket and write it to another bucket. So we've conformed to that specification.
So by default, LTFS, one tape is a subfolder. So how do you deal with an object larger than a tape, or an object that has to span tape boundaries?
Yeah, so we've looked at that problem. There's some SNIA work being done in LTFS tape spanning, but we actually believe we're going to do it ourselves. And the way we'll do that is we will take the file and split the object into multiple parts and name those multiple parts on the LTFS file.
Stub, already in Enterprise Edition LTFS, there's a stub command that allows you to take the file that would have exceeded the content, the space available on one tape cartridge, put a stub in that refers to another cartridge, and then continue the process on.
Right. Yeah.
That's in Enterprise Edition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like I said, I don't know if we're going to follow what work's been done in that area, though, for some other reasons.
So, so far we've talked about, how I'm going to use the API to get the data into the deep storage.
Yeah.
Let's say I've done that. I've got, petabytes of information in that library. And I've got a specific application, take an e-discovery application, for example, and I want to access that data and work on it, get some useful information out. Can you speak a little bit about how that works, and what do I need to do to the e-discovery application in my example?
Yeah.
Could you do that?
Sure. So the first thing I'd like to say is deep storage is not storage that's processed online. So this is a repository for data. If you need to process it, if you need to do true processing of the data, you need to bring the data back into your primary store and process it there. So it's a place for storing data for long periods of time. Our focus is on long-term data retention, long-term data accuracy. It's not on being able to process the data online. And I think Kevin and Yahoo spoke to that too, which is they're not going to be doing analytics on data that's in Black Pearl. If they want to do analytics, they'll be bringing the data back into their cluster and then processing it there. So did that answer your question? One point I do want to make, since you brought that up, very common, we'd like to see very large bulk puts because it's very efficient for the tape system. That doesn't mean that there needs to be corresponding bulk gets. It could be that you send a lot of data out and you want a subset of that data back for processing. It's not a requirement that you bring all the data that you sent out in a bulk get, bulk put, to come back in a bulk get. Very common that a bulk get might only have 1 or 2 data objects that are of interest.
I think one of the scenarios that you mentioned was a private cloud, and I believe also a public cloud. Is that correct?
Yes, so the technology is not biased to either of those.
Right.
Most of our customers will be deploying this as a private cloud. We may be selling this product to people who themselves provide public cloud services. So you can think of, and I don't want to give any names, but you can think of somebody who provides online storage, cloud storage, and they want to provide another tier for their customers. They may buy this product to do that.
All right, and you said that, I believe you said that very likely the Black Pearl will be co-located with the tape library in those cases.
Yeah, almost always, because remember the connection between the Black Pearl and the tape system is either SAS or fiber channel. The Black Pearl front end is a web-based interface that could be distance apart. That's much more WAN capable than the back end is.
Thank you.
I think we have one more here before you, John.
As you move into a public cloud environment, does latency become an issue?
That's an application. Latency is always an application question, so I'll give that back to like what Kevin said. So if you go into a public cloud environment and you have small objects and you're letting hundreds of people access the system, you're going to have latency problems and you're going to have queuing issues because of the tape system. But I'll give an example of where that might not be true. So Nathan mentioned a scientific site that we're working with, and they want to drop things into Deep Archive such that all their scientists can look at this data. Those data sets are 1.5 terabytes big. And if they're that big, then it really doesn't matter because you'll ask for that data back and it will take some time to load the tape, but certainly the time to restore the data will take longer. But you do not want to open a system like this up to random access of small data objects. That would be very harmful to the user in the tape system. Okay, is there any other questions?
All right, thanks, Dave. So as you look at, that's kind of small, that's okay. So as you look at the different client categories, and this is what Dave was talking about, we really see this as 3 different categories for the clients. That there's workflow-specific environments, so where you can find a specific workflow where there's lots of customers that have similar workflows. Pre-written clients makes a lot of sense. So Hadoop is a great example of anybody who's using Hadoop, how they would use a deep storage tier is pretty similar. Decide this data doesn't actively need to be in Hadoop, go ahead and move it to the deep storage tier. When you need it back, you bring it back to Hadoop. That's a discrete defined use case. We also see that these pre-written clients for workflow-specific environments can be tied to ISV partner application. So the specific workflow is we're tied to a software package, and that software package has pre-written a client to be able to leverage DS3. The next 2 presenters coming up are a good example of that, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that. However, looking at how we plan to roll this out is, given the NDA nature of what we're announcing, we haven't gone out and talked to any of the software partner vendors that you have in your mind that you might be thinking, are they going to have an option to utilize DS3 as one of the tiers they write to? We haven't talked to them yet. We've talked to a few close customer partners to make sure that we understand how partners will work with DS3, and that's why we have 2 of them here today. Later this week, we're going to be blasting a DS3 notification letter to all of the ISVs. So as far as those kinds of questions, we don't know the answer on how much adoption there will be with the active archive partners, the backup partners, and we haven't dipped our toe in the water yet. So we'll know that in a few weeks probably once we see that response. So that's where we see pre-written clients already available that a customer can just start using DS3 within their workflow without having to do a lot of work. Then you see this other category, and Kevin over at Yahoo is a great example of this, that they're big enough and have a unique enough workflow that they would much prefer to write their own clients. That maybe they'll use the Hadoop pre-written client, but Kevin talked about, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 different use cases within Yahoo that he might use it for. They'd probably write a custom client for each of those use cases. And they'd use our development community, do a custom client, and move on. We definitely see that with users who either are big enough that they have developers to do it, or that they just understand S3. Like Dave said, the folks who really understand S3, it's no big deal to them to write a client. Where we've seen the adoption to be a bit difficult is folks who've never heard of REST, never heard of S3, and we go in and talk to them about, well, here's a way to get access to the lowest cost storage tier, but they just don't understand the concept of object stores and deep storage and RESTful storage. Those guys probably aren't going to be a fit until we have, number one above, a pre-written client for their environment, which may be workflow specific or maybe an application tie that they already have. Did you have a question, John?
Yeah. Do you have a previous history of writing these kinds of clients? For example, your Active Archive Alliance, did you write easy to deploy clients that would allow the use of Spectra Logic libraries as part of an active archive?
So the question is, do we have experience in how we've written active archive clients? And the answer is twofold. Dave is hiring developers that just to write clients, that is what they do, that's their skill set, and that's their entire job, and they have lots of experience in it. Related to the active archive ties, that would be something that really would go into the active archive application. So FileTech, DMF, something like that, could have a client for DS3. We haven't talked to them about that yet. That's what's happening later this week. I highly expect they will, especially the ones who already have an export to S3 option. I don't see a reason why they wouldn't.
You look at a QStar, which is a member of Active Archive Alliance. They've been all over the whole object store for archive for a while, but they've never created a product to do it.
Exactly.
You've now given them the opportunity.
Yeah, so John's point is there's software applications out there who have created object store logic and things like that. I think we can't predict what other companies are going to do, although I'm certain we will see a lot of enthusiasm from software partners who see us as an option, and we have 2 speakers coming up talking about exactly why they're interested. And Active Archive, given that Spectra founded that and we're intimately involved with it, I'm sure you'll see it in Active Archive. The other piece that we can't really predict, but there certainly has been discussions around, is kind of tying back to what John's saying on the software side. There's also lots of object storage solutions out there that already are creating objects in some way, shape, or form. Why not make a copy of those objects off to DS3? We definitely expect over time that we'll see hardware tiering solutions, hardware object stores that are disk-based, to have the option that they can say, make a DS3 copy to deep storage. Again, we haven't talked to them about it. We have the vision towards it. We've had customers that we've spoken to about DS3 say that's the way they'd prefer to see it implemented, that I already have policies of how I'm handling my data in my object store or in my NAS storage. Why don't we just have a way to seamlessly tier to this? That, again, isn't in Spectra's control, but something customers are looking for.
Well, you also have EMC as end-of-lifing Centera. And you got a lot of hospitals, for example, that have patient healthcare data on these Centera archive boxes that are junk. They're data roach motels. If you could provide some sort of a transition to migrate those customers off their now end-of-life Centera boxes into Black Pearl, that would seem to be a low-hanging fruit opportunity for you.
I won't repeat his question since John has a built-in microphone. But I think the opportunities and options are limitless where you can see this deployed in areas like that. And it could be created by us. It could be created by, in that case, EMC. Or the customer might decide to create their own client. You know, there's a lot of flexibility here that you can see where coming back a year from now and seeing where this has gone is going to be interesting. In addition to, we have a roadmap that's done other clever things. But we're just dipping we're scratching the surface. We've validated with sufficient end users in different markets exactly how they would like to use this, and then it's going to be multiplicative once it gets out into the market, and we start telling everyone about it on Thursday. So really, we just want to emphasize that we see the client options coming from customer-generated, Spectra-generated, or software partner-generated, and you'll see clients from all of those areas.